Dust settles on the forgotten heroes of our time, hiding secrets that can bring a 4-star commander to his knees. What happens when arrogant rookies mistake a classified special warfare legend for a simple janitor? This is a story of hidden valor, unbelievable sacrifice, and a revelation that silenced an entire military base. Footsteps echoed sharply against the immaculately buffed linoleum of the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado. It was a Tuesday morning, and the air inside the administration building was thick with the distinct blend of salt air, floor wax, and the nervous sweat of unproven men. At 62 years old, Margaret Hayes was a fixture in this building, as invisible and permanent as the load-bearing pillars. Dressed in faded blue overalls, her silver hair pulled back into a severe no-nonsense bun, she pushed a heavy yellow mopping cart down the central corridor. She walked with a noticeable, rhythmic limp, a permanent souvenir from a lifetime she had buried deep beneath the mundane routine of bleach and dirty water. Officially, Margaret's personnel file listed her as a civilian contractor, the widow of a supply logistics officer who had passed away 2 decades ago. Unofficially, the truth was buried beneath so much black ink and red tape that even the Pentagon's top brass would need a week and a presidential cipher to uncover it. Margaret was a ghost. Back in the early 1990s, long before the modern era debated women in special operations, a highly classified Joint Special Operations Command initiative required operators who could slip completely unnoticed into hostile environments. Margaret was one of 3 women drafted into a Black Book attachment to Naval Special Warfare Development Group. She endured a shadow version of Bud's / bleeding on the same grinding sands, freezing in the same unforgiving surf, and ultimately earning a trident that she was forbidden from ever wearing on a uniform. But to the new crop of special reconnaissance candidates loitering by the quarterdeck, she was just the old cleaning lady. Connor Davies and Liam Brooks were the golden boys of their training class. Young, heavily muscled, and radiating the kind of toxic invincibility that only comes from passing a few rigorous obstacle courses, they leaned against the polished oak wainscoting, waiting for their morning briefing. "I'm just saying the standards are getting soft," Connor boasted, crossing his arms over his perfectly tailored camouflage blouse. Back in the day, they wouldn't let half these guys past week 3. We're the tip of the spear. Most of the people walking around this base are just dead weight. Liam chuckled, his eyes scanning the hallway before landing dismissively on Margaret as she approached with her cart. "Speaking of dead weight, look at this. How much of taxpayer money is going to keeping Jurassic Park open?" Margaret heard them. She always heard them. Her hearing was still sharp enough to pick out the click of a safety being disengaged from 50 yards away in a crowded bazaar. The arrogant whispers of 22-year-old recruits barely registered as a nuisance. She kept her eyes focused on the floor, dipping her mop into the soapy water and wringing it out with hands that were rough, scarred, and abnormally strong. As she maneuvered the heavy cart past the 2 recruits, a rusted wheel caught sharply on a transition strip in the flooring. The cart violently jerked sideways. A splash of gray soapy water sloshed over the rim of the bucket, landing directly on the toe of Connor's highly polished tactical boot. "Hey, watch it, Grandma!" Connor barked, violently kicking the side of the yellow bucket. The plastic cracked, and more water spilled across the pristine floor. "Are you blind? I literally just spent 2 hours spit-shining these." Margaret slowly straightened her back, a movement that sent a sharp spike of phantom pain shooting up her right leg. She didn't flinch. She simply looked down at the puddle, then up at Connor. Her eyes, a pale, icy blue, were devoid of the fear or subservience the young recruit expected. Instead, they held a terrifyingly calm calculation. In her mind, She automatically assessed his stance weight, shifted too far back, chin exposed, hands awkwardly resting on his hips. It would take her exactly 2 seconds to drop him, using the handle of her mop. "I apologize, candidate," Margaret said. Her voice was raspy, carrying the gravelly texture of someone who had once breathed in too much smoke and sand. "The wheel caught. Clean it up," Liam sneered, stepping closer to intimidate her. "And maybe get your eyes checked. If you can't push a mop without causing a casualty, maybe you shouldn't be working on a military installation." Margaret didn't argue. Argument was a waste of caloric energy. She simply nodded, bending down to meticulously wipe the water from the floor. As she reached forward, the cuff of her oversized blue uniform shirt slipped back an inch. For a fraction of a second, a heavily faded, distorted tattoo of an anchor crossed with a flintlock pistol was visible on her inner forearm. Liam caught a glimpse of it and laughed. "Nice ink, lady." "What? Did you get that at a carnival in 1980? Trying to pretend you're one of us?" Margaret paused. She pulled her sleeve down over her wrist, stood back up, and rested her hands on her mop handle. "Something like that," she murmured softly. "Just make sure you check your gear before your ruck march today, Brooks. Your left shoulder strap is misaligned. It'll tear your trapezius to shreds by mile 8. She turned and pushed her damaged cart down the hall, leaving the 2 recruits staring after her in stunned, uncomfortable silence. Liam instinctively reached up, his fingers brushing the webbing of his assault pack. The strap was, in fact, twisted exactly where she had pointed out. "Lucky guess," Connor muttered, though his voice had lost a fraction of its arrogant edge. "Crazy old bat." Margaret walked away, her face an unreadable mask. She reached into the deep pocket of her overalls, her fingers tracing the rigid, unmistakable edges of a heavy metal eagle clutching an anchor and a trident, pinned securely to a small blood-stained scrap of olive drab fabric. She squeezed it once, took a deep breath, and continued to clean. By Thursday, the atmosphere at the Naval Special Warfare Center had shifted from high-stress routine to borderline panic. The base was preparing for a Level 1 command inspection, accompanied by a visit from the commander of Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, General Arthur Harrison. General Harrison was a living deity in the special warfare community. He wasn't a desk general. He was a battlefield architect whose career was forged in the fires of the most classified, brutal conflicts of the late 20th century. Rumors about his past were traded like currency among the recruits. The most famous story involved a disastrous 1994 operation in the Balkans, codenamed Operation Broken Arrow. Pinned down in a collapsing church, surrounded by hostile militia, and bleeding out from a gunshot wound to the chest, Harrison, then a young lieutenant, had been miraculously saved. The official record stated an extraction team broke through enemy lines just in time. The whispered legends, however, spoke of a solitary, unidentified operator, a ghost, who had dropped from the rafters, single-handedly neutralized the advancing militia with terrifying precision, and dragged Harrison 3 miles through a blizzard to a designated exfiltration zone. Chief Petty Officer Miller, a man whose blood pressure seemed perpetually on the verge of causing an aneurysm, was pacing the main concourse, screaming at anyone in a uniform. "I want these floors so clean I can see my reflection in them, and I want it done 10 minutes ago." Miller roared, his face flushed red. "The general's convoy is 3 miles out. Davies! Rups, fix your gig lines. You look like unmade beds." Connor and Liam scrambled to adjust their uniforms, standing at rigid attention near the entrance to the commandant's suite. The hallway was a flurry of activity, but amidst the chaos, Margaret was steadily pushing her fractured yellow cart, replacing burnt-out light bulbs and polishing the brass door handles. "Hey, maintenance, Chief Miller snapped, pointing a thick finger at Margaret. "Clear this corridor. The General is going to be walking down this exact path in less than 5 minutes. I don't want to see a single mop, bucket, or civilian anywhere near this concourse." "Move it." "Yes, Chief," Margaret said quietly. She gripped the handles of a cart and pushed. Scrack. The rusted wheel, previously damaged by Connor's kick 2 days prior, finally gave out completely. The metal axle sheared off with a loud snap, and the heavy cart violently tipped forward, crashing onto the pristine floor. Soapy water, a tangle of rags, heavy brass polish, and a scattering of garbage spilled out across the exact center of the main hallway. The silence that followed was deafening. Every sailor and recruit in the corridor froze, staring in absolute horror at the sprawling mess. "Are you out of your mind?" Chief Miller exploded, sprinting toward her. "I told you to clear the hall, not detonate a trash bomb in it. Do you have any idea who's about to walk through those doors?" Connor and Liam, standing rigidly at attention near the doors, exchanged a cruel smirk. This was it. The arrogant old woman was finally going to get what was coming to her. She'd be fired on the spot, stripped of her base access, and thrown out the gates. Margaret didn't panic. She didn't cry or beg for her job. She knelt down, the sharp pain in her bad leg flaring wildly, and began to calmly gather the spilled rags. "It will be cleared in a moment, Chief," she said softly, her hands moving with the methodical efficiency of someone packing a parachute under fire. As she reached for a stray bottle of polish, something slipped from the breast pocket of her overalls. It hit the linoleum with a heavy, distinct metallic clink and skittered across the floor, coming to a dead stop exactly 3 inches from Connor Davies' boots. Connor glanced down without moving his head. It was a metal object, about the size of a challenge coin, but intricately shaped. He couldn't quite make out what it was, but he recognized the tarnished black and silver. Feeling emboldened by the chief's rage and wanting to impress his superiors, Connor subtly shifted his weight and kicked the object away, sending it sliding further down the hall toward the heavy double doors. "Leave it, Grandma," Connor whispered out of the corner of his mouth. "You're done." Before Margaret could stand to retrieve it, the heavy glass doors at the end of the corridor swung open with a violent rush of air. "Attention on deck," a voice bellowed. Every heel in the hallway clicked together in perfect, thunderous unison. Chief Miller froze, immediately snapping his hand to his brow in a razor-sharp salute. Connor and Liam stiffened, their eyes locked straight ahead, chests puffed out. General Arthur Harrison walked into the building. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in his Class A uniform, a literal wall of ribbons and medals covering his left chest. His face was weathered rock, lined with years of command and the heavy burden of sending men into the dark. Flanked by an entourage of aides, colonels, and base commanders, Harrison walked with a commanding, rhythmic stride. He moved down the corridor, his sharp eyes taking in the pristine walls, the saluting men, and then the massive puddle of soapy water and the broken yellow cart blocking his path. Chief Miller looked like he was about to faint. "General, sir, I apologize for this unacceptable." Harrison held up a single gloved hand, instantly silencing the chief. The general stopped walking. His eyes hadn't locked onto the mess, nor had they locked onto the saluting recruits. General Harrison was staring intently at the floor, directly in front of his polished black shoes. There, resting on the bright white linoleum, was the heavy metallic object Connor had kicked away moments before. The entire hallway held its breath. Connor swallowed hard, a drop of sweat rolling down his temple. He expected the general to explode, to demand the immediate court-martial of whoever was responsible for this disgrace. Instead, General Arthur Harrison, the 4-star commander of the most lethal military force on the planet, slowly bent down. He picked up the tarnished piece of metal, holding it delicately between his thumb and forefinger. It was a Navy SEAL trident, but it wasn't gold. It was cast in blackened steel, severely burned, missing the top half of the anchor, and stamped on the back with a serial number that didn't exist in any official military database. Harrison's hardened face suddenly drained of color. His hand, which had remained perfectly steady while calling in airstrikes on enemy positions, began to tremble violently. He looked at the heavy, burned trident, and then slowly raised his eyes, looking past the saluting recruits, past the panicked chief petty officer, directly at the hunched, 62-year-old cleaning lady, kneeling in the soapy water. Margaret slowly stood up, ignoring her throbbing leg. She wiped her wet, scarred hands on her overalls, looked the 4-star general dead in the eye, and gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. The silence that blanketed the central corridor of the Naval Special Warfare Center was no longer just respectful, it was suffocating. It was the kind of absolute vacuum-sealed quiet that typically precedes a catastrophic detonation. Dozens of highly trained sailors, instructors, and elite special reconnaissance candidates stood paralyzed, their eyes darting wildly between the 4-star commander of Joint Special Operations Command and the hunched, gray-haired woman in the oversized blue overalls. General Arthur Harrison did not scream. He did not bark orders or demand explanations from his subordinates. He completely ignored the frantic, panicked breathing of Chief Petty Officer Miller, who looked as though he might enter cardiac arrest at any given second. Instead, Harrison stepped directly into the puddle of spilled gray water. He did not care that the harsh industrial soap was instantly soaking into the immaculate fabric of his tailored dress trousers or ruining the mirror-like shine of his Oxfords. He closed the distance between himself and Margaret Hayes, his eyes locked onto her weathered, stoic face. Connor Davies, still frozen at the position of attention, felt a cold bead of sweat track a slow, agonizing path down his spine. His mind raced desperately, trying to compute what was happening. Why isn't he yelling at her? Why is he holding that piece of garbage like it's a Medal of Honor? When Harrison reached Margaret, the impossible happened. The towering, heavily decorated general, a man who had personally briefed presidents and commanded the most lethal kinetic strikes of the modern era, slowly and deliberately lowered himself. His right knee hit the soapy linoleum with a heavy, wet thud. A collective, muffled gasp rippled through the hallway. Colonel Bradley Jenkins, Harrison's right-hand aide, instinctively took a half-step forward in shock before freezing in place. Generals did not kneel. They certainly did not kneel in the middle of a hallway, in front of civilian janitorial staff amidst a pile of trash. Harrison looked up at Margaret from his kneeling position, holding the blackened, disfigured steel trident in his open palm. His voice, normally a booming instrument of absolute authority, was barely above a ragged whisper. Valkyrie. Harrison breathed, the word carrying 25 years of unimaginable weight. Margaret's icy blue eyes softened, just for a fraction of a second. The deep lines around her mouth twitched. That call sign was retired a long time ago, Arthur, she replied, her voice quiet but steady. And you're ruining your uniform. I don't care about the uniform, Harrison said, his jaw tightening as he fought to maintain his composure. I've had JSOC intelligence officers, NSA analysts, and Tier 1 trackers looking for you since 1998. The Department of Defense scrubbed your file so thoroughly that even I thought you were a phantom. They told me you died in a training accident off the coast of Coronado. Officially, I did, Margaret answered, glancing briefly at the stunned faces of the recruits lining the walls. It was the only way to keep the program buried. The world wasn't ready to acknowledge us. They still aren't. Being a ghost. It has its advantages. It's quiet. Harrison shook his head slowly, his eyes dropping to the burnt piece of metal in his hand. The memories of December 1994 came crashing back with violent, unforgiving clarity. It was Operation Broken Arrow, deep in the freezing, war-torn mountains near Sarajevo. His Ranger extraction team had been ambushed, cut to pieces by a heavily armed hostile militia. Harrison, then a young lieutenant, had been shot through the chest, his lung collapsing as he bled out on the freezing stone floor of an abandoned church. His radio was dead. His men were gone. He had made peace with his God and closed his eyes. And then the roof had caved in. A solitary figure, dressed in unmarked black winter gear, had dropped from the splintered rafters like an avenging angel. He remembered the terrifying surgical precision of the operator's movements, the silenced bursts of a suppressed submachine gun, the calculated deployment of flashbangs, the brutal, hand-to-hand elimination of the militia leader who had breached the church doors. The operator had stabilized Harrison's chest wound with duct tape and plastic sheeting, hoisted his 200-pound frame over her shoulders, and carried him through a blinding blizzard for 3 miles. Before the medevac chopper had touched down to pull Harrison to safety, the operator had vanished back into the tree line. The only thing she had left behind was a blackened, unrecognizable steel trident marker from a classified, off-the-books female SEAL integration program that the Pentagon officially denied ever existed. "You saved my life," Harrison said, his voice now echoing slightly in the dead silent hallway. "I have 3 children and 4 grandchildren who only exist because you refused to let me die on that mountain. I owe you my life, my career, and my soul." "You owe me nothing, General," Margaret said softly, reaching out to gently take the trident from his palm. She didn't look at it. She simply slipped it back into the deep pocket of her overalls. "You took the second chance I gave you and you used it to protect this country. That was the only payment I ever required. Now please get up. You're scaring the children." Harrison let out a short, breathless laugh, the tension in his shoulders finally breaking. He placed his large hands on his knee and pushed himself up, standing tall over the spilled bucket. He looked at Margaret, really looked at her, the limp, the calloused hands, the faded uniform. "Why are you here, Maggie?" he asked, using her real first name. "Why a mop? You could have had a black check pension. You could have had an estate. My husband was stationed here before he was killed in Mogadishu," Margaret said, her gaze drifting toward the glass doors leading out to the Pacific Ocean. "This base, it's the only home I have left. I wanted to stay close to the water. I wanted to keep an eye on the new blood. Make sure they don't forget what it means to serve." As she said the words, "new blood," Margaret's eyes slowly shifted, locking directly onto Connor Davies and Liam Brooks. General Harrison's eyes followed hers. The atmosphere in the hallway instantly shifted from reverent awe to a heavy, suffocating dread. Harrison's combat instincts flared. He looked at the broken wheel on the yellow cart. He looked at the massive puddle. And then he looked at the 2 recruits who were currently sweating through their pristine uniforms. "Who kicked this cart?" Harrison demanded. The warmth in his voice was completely gone, replaced by the freezing, jagged ice of a battlefield commander. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. "I asked a question," Harrison barked, his voice suddenly shattering the silence like a gunshot. "Who disrespected this woman?" Chief Miller, trembling violently, stepped forward. "General, sir, I quiet, Chief," Harrison snapped without looking at him. He stepped closer to Connor, his towering frame casting a dark shadow over the young recruit. He remembered the trajectory of the metal trident. He had seen it sliding away from Connor's boots right before he walked in. "It was you, wasn't it, candidate?" Harrison asked softly. Connor's throat bobbed. His face was the color of chalk. "Sir, General, sir, it was an accident. The cart was in the way." Margaret leaned heavily on her unbroken mop handle. "He told me to clean it up," she said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "He also suggested I might be too old to work on a military installation, and he kicked my medal." Harrison closed his eyes, taking a deep, slow breath through his nose. When he opened them, the absolute fury radiating from his gaze made Liam Brooks physically recoil against the wall. "The tip of the spear," General Harrison whispered, leaning in so close to Connor that the recruit could feel the heat of the general's breath. "That is what you call yourselves, isn't it? You run a few miles in the sand, you shoot a few paper targets, and you think you are gods among men. You think the uniform makes you invincible." Connor stared straight ahead, his eyes locked on a fixed point on the wall, completely paralyzed by fear. "No, sir. Do you have any idea who you are standing in front of?" Harrison roared, pointing a rigid finger at Margaret. "This woman was running black ops in hostile territories, before you were even a thought in your mother's mind. She survived a shadow program that broke 99% of the men who attempted it. She has bled into the dirt of countries you can't even find on a map to protect your right to stand here and act like an arrogant, entitled child." Liam swallowed hard, trying to remain invisible, but Harrison instantly turned on him. "And you," Harrison growled, stepping toward Liam. "Did you stand by and watch? Did you laugh while a Tier 1 operator cleaned your floors?" "Sir, I didn't know," Liam pleaded, his voice cracking. "We thought she was just a civilian. That makes it worse," Harrison bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "If she were just a civilian, a mother, a grandmother, a widow working a minimum wage job to keep this space clean for you, you owe her exactly the same amount of respect. A warrior does not punch down. A warrior protects those who cannot protect themselves. If you cannot respect the people sweeping the floors, you do not have the moral compass required to pull a trigger in defense of this nation." The silence returned, heavier and more oppressive than before. Chief Miller looked as if he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Colonel Jenkins and the rest of the general's entourage stood rigidly at attention, watching the brutal dismantling of the two recruits' careers. "Chief Miller," Harrison said, his voice dropping back to a terrifyingly calm register. "Yes, General," Miller barked, stepping forward. "Candidate Davies and Candidate Brooks are officially dropped from the Special Reconnaissance Pipeline, effective immediately," Harrison ordered. Connor's eyes widened in horror. His entire life, his entire identity, was built around earning his trident. "General, please, sir. You will be reassigned to the fleet," Harrison continued, completely ignoring Connor's plea. "You will chip paint, you will scrub decks, and you will learn what true humility is. And before you pack your bags, the two of you are going to get down on your hands and knees, and you are going to clean every single drop of water off this floor. You will use your own shirts if you have to." "General, that isn't necessary," Margaret interjected quietly. "They're just stupid boys. The military will break them eventually." Harrison turned back to Margaret, his expression softening instantly. "It is entirely necessary, Maggie. The standards here have slipped. I intend to correct them today." He turned back to his entourage. "Colonel Jenkins, call-based logistics. I want a new contractor assigned to this corridor immediately. Mrs. Hayes is retiring." Margaret frowned, gripping her mop handle tighter. "Arthur, I didn't ask for a handout. I like my job." "It's not a handout, Valkyrie," Harrison said, a faint smile touching his lips. "As the commander of JSOC, I'm officially reinstating you as a civilian tactical advisor to the Devdra training cadre. You want to watch over the new blood? Fine. But you're going to do it from a classroom, not from behind a broken yellow cart. You're going to teach them how to survive when the radios die and the sky falls." Margaret stared at him for a long moment, She looked at her calloused hands, then at the terrified recruits, and finally back to the 4-star general who owed her his life. Slowly, the tight lines around her mouth broke into a genuine, weathered smile. "I'll need full clearance," she said, her voice carrying the undeniable authority of a ghost stepping back into the light. "And I don't do morning PT runs. My knees are shot." "Done," Harrison agreed, nodding his head. Harrison took a step back, clicking his heels together. In front of the entire administration building, in front of the horrified recruits and the stunned chief petty officer, the 4-star general raised his hand and delivered a crisp, painfully slow and deeply respectful salute to the cleaning lady in the blue overalls. A second later, Colonel Jenkins saluted, then Captain Mitchell. Within moments, every single officer and sailor in the corridor was holding a rigid salute directed entirely at Margaret. Margaret stood tall. The phantom pain in her legs seemed to vanish entirely. She didn't return the salute. She didn't have to. She simply nodded, turned to Connor and Liam, who were already unbuttoning their uniform blouses to scrub the floor, and spoke one final time. "Make sure you get the corners, boys," Margaret said coldly. "The standards here are getting soft." Without another word, Margaret Hayes turned and walked down the hallway, leaving her broken cart, the soapy water, and a legacy of arrogant recruits behind her. She walked with a noticeable limp, but for the first time in 20 years, she walked like a giant. If Margaret's incredible story of hidden valor and true sacrifice left you speechless, hit that like button and share this video to honor the unseen heroes walking among us every day. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell for more gripping, real-life stories of courage and redemption. Who do you think the real heroes are? Let us know in the comments below.